ほら、ルフィ、今一緒に海賊になる仲間を探してるんだ。
Hello guys, welcome to my channel The Wandering Zoro, your go-to destination for anime-related content. And if you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out on our latest videos. In today's video, we're going to be diving into Part 9 of the series, so be sure to stick around until the end, and let's get started. The hunter could have ended the fight quickly with his presence unleashed and focused on her, but he didn't want to win with that method. He wanted to win with his body alone. He wanted a true fight, not something like the werewolf where he tested his presence against opponents. So instead, the hunter charged with his teeth bared in a permanent smile. Mirko easily dodged the initial strike, but the speed of the tail caught her off guard for a second until she smiled herself at the challenge. She picked up the speed herself and responded with the tail swipe by sending a flurry of kicks to the side of the creature before her. The first few impacts didn't hurt, but it was enough to push him off course. He quickly adapted to her speed and returned the flurry of attacks with his own. His claws slashed, his tail whipped, and his teeth bit down, but all missed or were blocked while he received more strikes from her. They weren't the worst strikes he had taken, but they stung. He quickly changed his tactics and raked the concrete with his claws. He launched a bloom of dust and concrete chunks towards Mirko's eyes. She covered them and retreated. She knew this tactic. The hunter pounced right after the blinding attack, but it was less than effective. Instead of catching her unawares, he was kicked in the side of the head and was sent spinning. Mirko, Gang admonished her as he looked at Izuku with worry. He's good, Mirko said, grinning from ear to ear. Izuku's head was rattled, but quickly came to what had happened. He pulled himself up and felt his broken jaw. His four eyes locked onto Mirko's too. Without looking away, his jaw cracked back into place without raising a finger. He dropped to all fours and began to prowl around the standing woman. His tail lashes the air from time to time as he observes the woman. Super move, adrenaline overdose. A dozen voices rumbled in unison. The hunter's body began to produce enough adrenaline to kill a lesser man and diffused it along his body faster than the blink of an eye. The concrete shattered under his feet as he charged Mirko faster than before. She was caught off guard by the sudden speed and was launched away. The hunter didn't let up and sprinted after her with a bestial roar. Mirko managed to counter with a kick of her own as his fist impacted against her foot. The air cracked at the sound of the impact, and they were launched away from each other. The hunter shot out tendrils to slow his backward slide. He nimbly landed on his paws and charged back with a dozen tendrils whipping behind him. Mirko, for her part, landed against the wall of the arena and used it as a launching platform. It cracked under her powerful legs. She swung her leg around and axe kicked where she predicted the hunter to be. She missed, and concrete shrapnel shot everywhere. The hunter roared in pain, but pushed forward with his clawed hand aimed at the leg still embedded in the ground. Everyone's fights began to waver as their eyes were drawn to the fight between Mirko and a beast. Even Gang Orca couldn't keep his eyes off of the fight. It was primal with no words thrown, only grunts of effort and animalistic growls. And was what the fight was, animalistic. Izuku didn't think, only acted like an animal while Mirko was trained for years. Izuku was again kicked into the ground where he left a crater. He roared in anger as a bloody Mirko slammed her foot down on his chest. He coughed up BLD and felt his ribs break. With BLD running out of his mouth, he grabbed onto her leg and whipped her to the ground. She slammed into it, and then was picked up again and slammed down once more before being thrown full force at the wall where she slumped against it. The hunter took a break and made his caved-in chest pop back out. His ribs were repaired and his lungs inflated properly. He breathed in and let out a long growl as Mirko got up on unsteady legs. Her silver hair was stained red with BLD and she had multiple lacerations across her body. She still looked at him with a feral smile. Meanwhile, Izuku's bruises healed before everyone's eyes and his clothes were knit closed along with any wounds. You are one tough son of a beach. Mirko cackled. Izuku growled and lowered to charge once again. Don't call my mother that. Mirko smiled back and lowered herself to meet the charge. Make me, Lunar Arc. She made the first move with her leg. Super move, remove restrictions. The hunter charged back with a roar. On a few of Izuku's research benches, He had found many stories of people without any kind of muscle or strength quirks doing impossible things. One famous story was of a mother lifting a car off of her son who was being crushed by it in the pre-quirk era. All these stories have in common that the person who did the impossible was in life and death situation. So, Izuku found what gave people this ability, and it was powerful, but the drawback was damaging his body. The body can outperform its best in a life and death situation, but if we had that active all the time, we would rip our bodies apart. Izuku learned how to turn these limitations off, and with his compressed muscles and bones, it compounded to great effects. The concrete shattered and his paws were almost ripped apart at his sudden acceleration. His bones creaked and his muscles ached even with all the adrenaline in his body. The two met in midair and impacted against each other. The hunter's fist shot up to meet the descending leg of Mirko. The two impacted and bones cracked. A sonic boom was heard through the building, and the two were launched back from each other again. Mirko's leg was moved wrong, and Izuku's arm was torn from the inside out. The hero landed harshly against the ground and groaned in pain from her leg to the rest of her battered body. Izuku was launched through a collapsed building's wall and stopped at a pillar. Everyone watched in horror at the aftermath of such an exchange and quickly moved to help the both of them. Todoroki was the first to Izuku's side and gasped at seeing his state. "Izuku, are you all right?" The half-and-half boy couldn't help but ask as he knelt next to him, unsure what to do with the rebar sticking out of his stomach. "Alive." Izuku groaned and tried to move, but the rebar held him back. He groaned with pain all over his body, and he reached for the rebar, but his arm responded slowly. He looked at it, and it was purple and bloody with torn muscles. "I just grew that back." He whined. "Don't move." Gang Orca said near him. "I'm fine." Izuku showed this by having a tendril shear off the rebar, and then he yanked it out of his belly. He groaned in pain but tossed it to the side as he began to repair the vital organs. Nothing important was hit other than his intestinal tracts. He got to his knees and then stumbled onto his paws. "Mikaminami," he shouted and stumbled out of the hole he created. "Izuku, sit down. You are hurt seriously," Gang implored. Izuku held a clawed finger to Gang's mouth. "Shush. You are a villain, and I don't listen to villains." He stumbled out into the light to find Mirko trying to get up, but failing due to all the staff trying to hold her down. He saw this and could only say one thing. "I win," he roared with a dozen voices. "Huh. Like hell you did. Once I get up, Emma, get your dirty hands off of me." Mirko fought against the attendants who were trying to put her in a gurney. "Izuku, the exam ended a while ago." Gang Orca pulled at Izuku's shoulder to sit due to his recent injuries. He turned to his mentor in confusion. "Oh, all right." Izuku shifted back to normal with some effort and dropped to the ground. "Did we pass?" he asked from the ground. Gang huffed out a breath and knelt to pat Izuku's head. "You'll find out soon." "How are your injuries?" he asked. Izuku took stock of his body. Most of his muscles were sore from his super move. His stomach was already repaired, and he was currently working on fixing his arm. It was simple enough since he had the materials he needed, but only needed energy to reconstruct the torn muscles and ligaments. "I'm hungry," he finally said with a nod. Gang snorted out a laugh. "I'll take that as you're fine. It was nice to see you." He ruffled his hair and got up to check on the other hero being carted off. A pair of footsteps sounded behind Izuku, and he tilted his head back to see who it was. He fell onto his back and stared up at Kaken. "What happened?" he asked with his hands on his hips. "Rimikimi showed up, and we fought. I won," Izuku said, beaming from his back. Kaken frowned down at his old friend and then looked questioning at Todoroki. "Mirko and him fought," he answered. The blonde looked down at Izuku with his eyebrows raised. "Mirko? The number 5 hero? If that's a bunny hero, then yep." She said she wasn't a bunny, but I could tell. "Rabbits smell different from bunnies," he said with confidence. Kaken eyed him for a long moment before shaking his head and leaving him prone on the ground. "Come on, then. The exam is over." Izuku and the other two reunited with the rest of the pack soon after. The pack leader made sure everyone was accounted for and, with a nod, headed to the locker room to change. "You fought Mirko," Kaminari said after Izuku explained why his arm was still red from his super move. "Yep," Izuku said, beaming. There was a quiet moment before saying, "Was she hot?" Kaminari asked. Izuku paused and frowned. "She didn't have any fire abilities, I think." "Roki, did she?" He turned to the half-dressed boy. "No, she doesn't." he said, and then asked, "Why ask me? Not all fire users are related," he said, smirking slightly. Izuku looked conflicted. "Are you sure?" Kaken scoffed. "Of course not. You and Shoji aren't related, are you?" he said sarcastically. "We might be," Izuku said indignantly, and turned to the big pack member for his opinion. Shoji looked at all of them, and his eyes crinkled in a smile hidden behind his mask. "We might be." Kaken scowled at the bigger boy while everyone around them chuckled and laughed. "Don't encourage him." All of Class 1A was gathered in front of a large screen with the rest of the students who passed Phase 1. Izuku had already gotten a scolding from his mate when she saw his slightly bruised arm. The muscles were just about done reconstructing, but they were visibly injured to anyone who looked. Everyone stopped talking when the screen flickered on to show every name with a score next to the name. There were many cheers and an equal amount of groans. Izuku found his name and his score if he pouted at getting such a low score, but was happy overall at passing. He caught Mina as she leapt on him in jubilation at seeing her score in the passing range. He beamed and hugged her in return. She let go and went to Hagakure to celebrate together with the other girl. He turned back to the screen and looked at everyone else's names to see if everyone had passed. They did, and he was overjoyed to see his whole pack had passed the exam. The lowest was Roki with a score of Kaken was behind him with his chin raised and a smirk on his face. "Kinda low there, Izuku." Izuku frowned in confusion and turned back to the screen to see that Kaken had scored higher than him, by 5 points. He turned back with a scowl. "It's only 5 points," he said with the tone to make it sound like it wasn't a big deal. Kaken smirked even more. "Sure, tell yourself that." He finished by waving his hand nonchalantly and turning away. Izuku did the mature thing and kicked him in the back of the knee, just as his other was bent while he walked. The blonde crumpled at the unexpected move, and he fell to the ground to his knees. "You little SHD. Kaken roared as Izuku bolted away with a cackle. He got up and sprinted off after him. The pack of 1A marveled at their shiny new licenses before them. They were outside waiting next to their bus to head back to the dorms. Most of them were taking pictures and talking on their phones with family to pass the news. Izuku wasn't any different as he called Nem. "Izuku, how did it go? Did you pass? If you didn't, you don't have anything to worry about. It took me 3 tries to pass when I was your age." Nem spoke first. "I passed," Izuku said, beaming. Nem squealed in joy and Izuku could hear her hopping in place. "That's wonderful, honey. I'm so proud of you." Izuku felt his throat close up at hearing that, and SCKD and tears threatening to come out. "Thank you, Mom." He sniffed once. The line was quiet for a moment before Nem's voice came through again. "I'll cook up something nice tonight. Swing on by, all right?" He could hear the watery tone on the other end. "Okay. Love you, honey. I'll see you in a bit." Izuku paused for a second at the words and thought about Nem. She took care of him since the day they met. She watched over him, explained things to him, spent time with him, and had fun together. She checked in on him frequently throughout the day and worried about him when he was injured or when villains attacked his class. Namuri was what Inko was supposed to be, and he was happy things turned out this way. "I love you too," he said, smiling at the ground. Soon after, the phone call ended, and Izuku noticed the stares from his pack. "What?" he asked with his head tilted in confusion. Kirishima tentatively asked. "You said Mom. We thought your mother was in jail." He looked unsure and looked at the others with nods. "Inko is in jail." He paused, and a look of realization came over him. "Oh, that was Nem. She's my mom now," he said, beaming at them. "She adopted you? That's wonderful," Yayaruzo said first, her hands clasped together, and she smiled happily at the news. The rest of the pack joined in soon with their congratulations on hearing the news. Their licenses were forgotten for the moment to hear their pack leader tell them about his birthday party and the gift Nem had given him. Aizawa had joined them halfway through the story and waited quietly for him to finish with softer eyes than usual at the green-haired horned boy tell everyone about getting adopted by Namuri. When the story was over, Aizawa herded everyone onto the bus. Once everyone was on board, the bus began to move and head home. Siro stood up in his seat near his teacher and asked him, "Yo, Aizawa, do they always have 2 top heroes for the exam?" "Sit down," Aizawa commanded him without turning around, and after a moment spoke again. "No, usually it's someone in Gang Orca's level or many lower-level heroes." There were some sounds of confusion at that, and Yayaruzo asked, "Then why was Mirko there?" Aizawa turned around finally and locked eyes with Izuku, who was kicking his legs like a child. She just showed up. I'll let you guess why. Izuku looked around at everyone who stared at him. "McKinemy was there to fight me?" he said with his eyebrows raised, and then he nodded in understanding. "Well, she lost," he said cheerily. "God, you are terrible at remembering names," Toshi said across the aisle from him with a small smile. It was getting dark and Izuku was having a celebration dinner with Nem. She immediately embraced her son as soon as he walked through the threshold of the small home. Izuku melted in her arms and returned the embrace. She sat him down at the dinner table, placed a hot meal in front of him, and let him enjoy the taste of lamb chops she had gotten for a special occasion. She joined him at the dinner table and asked him about the exam. He happily told him about the werewolf, saving civilians, finding gang, and then fighting the number 5 hero. She was surprised at hearing the last part and smiled warmly at him when he told her about their fight. "And I got these." Izuku proudly showed off his trophies to his mother. Tendrils snaked out of his side to present him with the 2 patches, the hat, and something he was able to grab from the hero he fought. Namuri took them carefully to examine them. She smiled knowingly at Izuku and lightly rebuked him. "I'm pretty sure the rules for the exams prevent you from taking things from other examinees." Izuku looked sheepishly at his mother as she continued. "But I won't say anything." "What's this?" She held a metal part. "That's from Kimarimi's boots. The last hit broke a few bones. That was lodged in my hand, and I figured out it was part of her boots. I think it's the back part since she axe kicked me," he said proudly as he took the hat and placed it on his head with his curly hair puffing out the sides of the hat. She smiled at his terrible way of forgetting names and pinched his nose. "They're great trophies." He beamed at her and took the patches to cut the patches from the fabric that still clung on. Small tendrils came out with a scalpel-like blade on the ends to cut them ever so carefully. Nem smiled warmly at him as he worked on his trophies. While she hated what that woman did to Izuku, she was grateful it turned out this way with him as her son. "Izuku, honey, you can't just threaten a cat like that," Nem said gently but reproachfully to her son. Izuku pointed at the Bengal cat who was seated next to him on the lawn of her home and cleaning herself with her paw. "She started it," he shouted like a child. Nem put her hands on her hips and frowned down at him with an expression that could be described as incredulous. "She left some fur and bones from her meal at your den." Izuku crossed his arms and pouted. "I like to keep my den clean. And I eat my bones." He turned to glare at the cat, who looked innocently up at the 2 humans. She then rolled over to show her belly for rubs, and Nem obliged happily. Izuku narrowed his eyes at the cat as she purred while she was being stroked gently. "If you explain that to her, she will learn," Nem said, crouching down next to Izuku, who was seated on the grass. "I'll teach her all right," Izuku grumbled. Nem smiled at him and his adorable pouting face. She pinched his cheek and then kissed the top of his forehead while getting up. "All right, I'm off to work. Be good." Izuku smiled at her affection and waved. "Bye." After a moment, he looked at the cat. She got up and stared at him. "Don't leave a mess at my Denver," he said seriously. The cat chirped and butted her head against his leg. He huffed out a breath and awkwardly patted her head before getting up and heading to the dorms. He trotted from Nim's home back to where most of his packmates were resting. At the back door, he slid it open and the cat slipped inside. He ignored her and made his way to the cabinet where his lamb sticks were. He grabbed one and made his way to the common room where some of his pack mates lay around. "Hey, Zu." His mate greeted him with a beaming smile. She sat next to Hagakure, who was leaning on her shoulder while she typed away on her phone. She glanced down and raised an eyebrow. "Who's that?" Izuku smiled in return, but then frowned slightly at the question. He looked down and saw the cat walking lazily around and sniffing the area. "Oh, you." The cat looked up at him and chirped. "If you have a pet, you must gain approval from the faculty," Ida said while chopping his arms. He motioned to Kuda for an example. "Isn't that the same cat from the first day at the dorms?" Tsu noted with a croak. Izuku curled his lips slightly at the cat who was prowling around with his packmates trying to coax her for pets. "Not mine. She just stays near here and leaves messes in my den." He eyed the animal with narrowed eyes. "Don't be like that, Zu. Just look at her." Mina picked up the cat and held her up like Simba from the Lion King. The cat let out a long meow as she dangled limply from Mina's grasp. Toshi crawled near and gently brushed his hand over the cat's head. She butted her head into his hand and purred audibly. He smiled and coaxed the cat to leap onto his lap after Mina put her down. He continued to slide her fur, ecstatic to have a cat in his lap. He looked up at Izuku and raised a brow at feeling his best friend's animosity towards the cat. Hagakure giggled and asked the local feral child, "Izuku, are perhaps jealous of the cat?" Her sleeve went up to her mouth to cover her mouth. Everyone turned to Izuku, and he looked back towards everyone. "I'm not. I'm better than her in every way." He stomped his paw like a petulant child. The room tried to hold in their snorts and laughter, but it was futile, which caused Izuku to pout. Mina got up and brought his head down to hug it. She brushed his ever-messy hair and cooed. "Of course, you are my green apex predator." Kakin snorted at the display. "For being one of the most dangerous people here, you sure are delicate." He shook his head and turned back to the TV. Mina pulled Izuku to the couch and had him sit down in front of her on the ground between her legs. She began to untangle his bird's nest of hair. He relaxed under her touch and leaned comfortably back under his mate's grooming. The rest of the class got back to doing whatever they were doing before the small interruption. Mina happily chatted with Hagakure while she braided Izuku's hair. He let out a sigh of contentment. Later that night, the hunter wandered his territory. It was nearing sunset, and he was looking around for a snack before settling in his den. The animals in his territory had gotten smart quickly and found ways of hiding from him or digging their dens deeper to avoid his notice. That didn't deter him from hunting. He was currently eyeing a small den of gophers when he paused and sniffed the air. He tilted his head at the scent of fresh BLD, ignoring the gophers. He turned in the direction of the scent. It didn't take him long to find the wall of his territory and the grounds of UA. But the scent of BLD was very close and on the other side of the wall. He looked around before shifting back to normal and then leaping onto a tree. From there, he jumped to the top of the wall to peer over it. His claws dug grooves into the thick concrete as he lifted himself up and over the wall. He stood on it and looked around to find the source of the scent. On the other side of the wall was a road with a sidewalk hugging the wall. Across the road were the backs of buildings. Not much movement, but looking down, he found the source of the scent. A trail of BLD led to a limp form of a dog. Even from 15 feet off the ground, he could tell it was fatally wounded. He leapt down and landed with a thump on the sidewalk. Getting close to the dog showed it was still alive, but breathing with much difficulty. Izuku crouched down next to the dog, a mutt by his estimation, and looked at his wounds. Dark brown fur was matted with BLD from its belly. Its back legs looked wrong, and so did its spine. He could see BLD leaking from its nose, which led to internal bleeding. It was a matter of time until the dog died. The feral boy had grown used to the death of animals around him, and this was no different. But he knew dogs have almost always been companions to people, and he could imagine this mutt belonging to someone. So he stayed with him in his last moments. The mutt gave a wheezing breathing and opened its eyes. Bright blue eyes looked around and landed on Izuku's crouched form. He could see the mild intelligence in the animal's eyes, and he could see the animal understood it was dying. Izuku didn't say anything but stayed near the dog as he could smell the fear coming off the dog. The fear wasn't directed at him, but at his coming end. He gently brushed his hand over the mutt's ears in comfort, and the dog whimpered. Then Izuku felt something being sent his way from the dog, a faint connection. With curiosity, he accepted the connection, and Izuku felt the dog's mind. He had a quirk. It was very rare for animals to have a quirk. The dog sent faint emotions to Izuku, almost words. Fear, pain, loneliness, sadness, and finally a small bit of hope. He felt the dog tell him what had happened. A large car had hit the back of his body while he tried to cross the road. How he scavenged for food in alleys. How he was always shunned by other packs. How he was alone and now dying. Izuku took all that in and thought about what he could do to help. The mutt was far too injured to get any help. Not even that old woman could help the dog in its state. He did think he could give the dog a quick end, but then paused. He might be able to help. "I can try and save you, but it might not work," Izuku said tentatively, both verbally and with the faint connection the dog had made. He received pleading in return, and that's all Izuku needed. He extended tendrils to lock the dog's body how it was to minimize any more injuries, and then he began to climb the walls back to his territory. It took a while, but he got over the barrier, and then he bolted to his den. Once there, he gently lowered the animal to the grass. With the connection failing, Izuku spoke. "This will hurt, but I will help you." He received acceptance, and then he began. First, he needed to make sure the dog didn't die from BLD loss and oxygen deprivation. He focused on the brain to begin. With a tendril, he quickly found the carotid arteries and began to copy the BLD the dog had. With an external heart to pump the BLD he created, he connected to the dog's circulatory system isolated to his head. The dog whimpered at the pain. Izuku quickly made a parasite connected to him and blocked the nervous system at the neck to free the dog from pain. The mutt relaxed some, and he got back to work. Halfway through fixing the dog's spinal column, Izuku's arm buzzed. He pulled the communication device from his arm and pushed the button while he worked. Izuku, I see that you left the ground and another being came back with you. Is everything all right? Nizu asked calmly. Izuku grunted as the vertebrae cracked and then began to heal stronger than before. Yep, just busy. There was a pause, and then Nizu asked, Do you need any assistance? With his focus being split at the moment, he was short with the principal. I'm okay. Very well, contact me if you need anything. Nizu cut the line, and Izuku absorbed the device back into his arm. The feral boy's knowledge of human and animal biology rivaled some of the geniuses in Japan. He was able to mimic biology, not his own, so well that it became indistinguishable from the original. For all the benefits he had with his quirk and knowledge, he could not give what was his. He could not donate an infinite amount of the needed BLD. He could not donate organs people needed. And he couldn't heal people because if he did, then he would become part of that person. His every cell was his quirk, and he didn't know what would be the effects of having a living part of him go to someone else. Would the organ or BLD act normally without his instruction, or would it do something unpredictable and hurt the person? Would his immune system attack the person who receives it and spread it throughout their body to cause devastating damage? Too many questions and no way of safety testing it without a creature. So that is what Izuku will do with the mutt. He will heal him and make it so his created BLD and organs will work with the dog's natural body. And maybe on the way, he could improve the canine to something better. Better lungs, stronger bones, and improved red and white BLD cells. Just the very basics of what Izuku made him the best hunter. The dog slipped in and out of consciousness at times. He was confused but free of pain. At some point, the cat arrived, and it sat a few feet away from the two, just watching intently at Izuku's work. He wasn't sure how intelligent the cat was, but the way she watched tendrils slip in and out of the dog's body to modify its parts was not natural. He wondered if she had a quirk as well, but pushed those thoughts away to continue to focus on the dog's body. Its rear legs were healed from their pulverized form. He strengthened the bones with his mass and added compact muscles. Not to the degree Izuku had, but the dog would be much stronger than any normal dog should be. His spinal column was fixed with added nerves to enhance its response time. The spine was made to be more flexible like his, with the added bone density. He copied everything he had done to the front legs to ensure his base body didn't strain from having a better lower half. He healed a cancer that was beginning to grow on the dog's lungs and improved them as well. Every organ was cleaned and vastly enhanced. His claws were changed to become more dense, and the cells that made them grow changed to keep the changes in the future. Bone marrow was thickened to produce more BLD when needed, and he made sure it was compatible with the dog's body. Finally, he moved on to the head, the most delicate part of the body. He produced serotonin and mixed it into the BLD, keeping the dog alive to make sure it didn't wake at a bad time when working on the brain and its connecting neurons. He worked from the inside out, starting at the brain. He made sure there was no visible sickness such as tumors or anything of the sort. When he finished adding the nerves to the proper connections, Izuku improved the senses of the dog. His nose was already good and only added a small improvement. His ears were mostly left alone, but his eyes were reconstructed to his standards. Izuku knew dog eyes were subpar in the animal kingdom, so he copied his own into the dog's. After that, he moved on to the teeth and jaws. They were simple to modify. Stronger teeth and denser muscles in the jaws. He finished having hair-like tendrils rake the dog's fur to clean the crusted BLD. Any parasites were consumed, and the skin knit closed finally. He tenderly extracted from his arteries while he healed the wounds. He watched very carefully for any signs of something going wrong, but so far the dog's lungs and heart took up the work once again. Then he absorbed the parasite that kept the dog numb and paralyzed. Again, no ill signs, and Izuku tentatively leaned back from his work. The dog's breathing and heartbeat were consistent as he slept from fatal injuries to healthier than any dog could be. Izuku hoped the last command he gave to his cells in the dog's body would work. It was a simple command to keep the dog alive and healthy. Izuku leaned back and let out a breath. He looked around, and it was late in the night. The stars shone high above, and the cat next to them still sat watching everything he had done. He focused on the dog again and stayed awake the whole night, observing his condition in case something went wrong. It was an hour after the sun rose when the dog stirred in his sleep. Izuku set his book aside to watch how the dog acted. The mutt slowly became aware of his surroundings and then began to move. It was tentative at first, most likely expecting pain from its injuries, but was surprised when he felt nothing. The mutt checked for its legs and saw them healed. He sniffed his body and then turned to Izuku, who was seated crisscross watching the dog wake. Izuku felt the connection form between the mutt and him. He felt the dog's mind send him questions about his body and why he felt the way he did. "I healed you and made you better. I wasn't sure if it'll work, but I guess it did," he said to answer the dog. The dog looked around and sent more questions about his eyesight and the colors he had never seen before. Izuku answered every question he was sent without hesitation. Then the dog got up from its seated position and stumbled slightly before righting itself and walking around. He stretched his new body and shook his shaggy fur. The mutt then asked where they were. The questions the dog sent were more emotions than actual words, but Izuku understood them fine enough. He answered, "This is my territory, my den is there. It's part of a place where people go to learn. The others live in a building, but I like it out here more." The mutt sniffed at Izuku, and he let him. He sent curious thoughts about the scents he picked up. "My pack. I am the pack leader of them and my mate. Also, a cat that's somewhere around here." Izuku saw a slight sadness at the mention of a pack and felt it through the connection. He watched the dog for a moment and shrugged. "Do you wish to be part of my pack? Live here and be safe?" he asked. The dog perked up at his words and then quickly lowered his body to the ground while wagging his tail furiously in happiness that was sent through the connection. Izuku received several emotions ranging from excitement to joy and then acceptance. The feral boy beamed and sent the emotion through the connection. He gently patted the dog's head and got up to stretch. The dog got up with him and excitedly ran around his legs. "I'm hungry. Let's hunt," Izuku said and shifted into his hunter form. The dog was startled but calmed down, and curiosity sniffed his legs and body. The hunter led him, and then the two were off to find their first meal of the day. The boy and dog walked side by side, headed to the dorms. The dog happily looked around and sniffed the area while he chewed on a bone. The dog had quickly learned to adapt to his new body and his new strength. His teeth shredded bone like tough hide and skin like paper. So he was careful with the bone he played around with. They walked up to the back door of the dorms, and Izuku instructed the dog to wipe his paws like he did before entering. "Where in all the 9 hells did you find a dog?" Kaken asked incredulously where he was seated at the kitchen counter. He stared at the mutt, who looked around curiously and sniffed the floor. The dog looked up at Izuku for permission and sent it through the connection. "This is where my pack lives. Don't hurt anyone," he said sternly, and sent the threat through the connection to make sure he understood. When the dog lowered his head, Izuku nodded, and the mutt began to roam near his pack leader. "Stop saying bad words. I found him hurt and helped him." He pointed at his old friend. "Izuku, I have to remind you, pets have to be approved by the staff before obtaining them. Also, you need to make sure no one has an allergy to them." Ida chopped his arms while the dog sniffed his mufflers on his legs. Izuku frowned a bit. "But he's not my pet, he's part of my pack," he said, beaming at the announcement. "You." Kaminari and Shiro happily knelt to pet the dog, who happily let them rub his head and back. Yayaruzo smiled softly with a raised brow. "My family had a few guard dogs. I don't think it's such a bad idea. Especially if he listens to Izuku like the ones at my home did." "What's his name?" She leaned down to get a closer look at the dog. Izuku shrugged. "I don't know. I didn't ask." Kaken snorted a laugh. "If you did, would he answer?" When Izuku tilted his head and pursed his lips in thought, he stopped and looked at him. "What can you talk to animals now?" he asked incredulously. "I could ask." Kuda offered and raised his hand slightly and got close to the animal to begin to speak to it. Sato was with the other 2 boys, rubbing the dog's belly. "I always wanted a dog. But would it be all right with you, eh?" Kaken was about to snark about letting Izuku live there when Kuda yelped in surprise and reared back from the dog. Oh yeah, the dog has a quirk. Some sort of emotional telepathy. No words, but emotions. Izuku said casually. Everyone paused at that, and then looked at the animal who paused, and felt all the eyes on him. Then he got up and quickly got between Izuku's legs. The dog connected to Izuku, and he felt sudden apprehension from the dog. The feral boy sent back reassuring thoughts and patted his head. The dog paused and then sniffed the air before his ears perked up where the stairs were. Mina came trotting down and paused at the scene. The dog quickly trotted over to her, and Izuku guessed he caught the scent of his mate. Mina squealed in joy at the dog who sniffed at her, and then happily accepted her affectionate pets. Aren't you precious? Mina cooed and knelt to have the dog lick her hand. Then the dog sat next to her and proudly wagged his tail. Izuku felt a strong emotion sent to him by the dog, protection. Izuku smiled at that and felt happy to have the newest member of his pack doing what he very much approved of. Mina paused finally when she saw everyone's looks directed at the dog. What? She asked, confused, and then she felt the connection form between the dog and her. She widened her eyes at the dog and tentatively accepted the connection. She felt a flood of emotions that told her a story of how he was hurt, and Izuku saved him. She reeled at the sudden onslaught, but understood and looked at Izuku. Are you all right, Mina? Yaoyorozu asked at her sudden facial expressions. She eyed the dog with trepidation when she learned he had a quirk. Mina patted the dog's head and nodded. Yeah, just got told a story with emotions. It was a lot was all. She stood up and made her way to Izuku to hug him. You did good, she whispered to him. Izuku happily hugged her back, and the dog trotted behind Mina to sit by their side. Everyone turned when there was a groan from the stairway to see Toshi with his head tilted to the ceiling in exasperation. Are you going to pick up every stray you find? He asked his best friend. What do you mean you healed him? How? Kaken asked Izuku. A few of his pack mates were in the kitchen from the commotion caused by everyone fawning over the friendly dog. While the dog was play fighting with Sato and Kirishima, Izuku was telling them how he found the dog and healed him. Well, at first I thought I couldn't use my quirk to heal people because every cell in my body is affected by my quirk. I didn't know what would happen if my cells went into another person's body. It is almost an automatic response to heal any injuries and purge any impurities in my body. So I always thought if my BLD or donated organs were put in a person, they would react very badly to them. Like a very strong animal put in the middle of weaker animals. Naturally, the strong animal would dominate, and in a human body, death, or maybe worse. If anyone didn't know Izuku was as close to being a feral human being, they would think he would be a teacher lecturing his students at the moment as he gestured with his hands and some tendrils for examples. The mutt, Zoo, that's rude. Mina chastised him before he could continue. Izuku paused and looked at the mutt. But that's what he is. Anyway, I asked if he wanted my help even though I wasn't sure if it would work. Toshi rose a bit off of his seat and raised his hands to stop him. Wait. Did you experiment on the dying dog? Izuku, I am pretty morally skewed ever since befriending you, but that's not okay. Everyone looked back and forth between Izuku and Toshi as they talked. He was dying, and I told him it might not work. But even if it didn't, he wouldn't feel a thing, I made sure. The only experiment was if his body would accept my cells. I knew everything else I was doing. And they did. Now he's the best dog that ever lived. Izuku defended himself. Ida to the side straightened and looked sharply at Izuku when he realized what he had done. He was about to speak up, but Toshi spoke over him. That's still animal experimentation, Toshi said, dragging his hand through his hair. He knew his best friend wouldn't ever do something malicious, but he wanted to make sure he understood the morality of the current situation. Izuku looked completely confused. But, you've done animal experimentation too? Everyone looked shocked and whipped their heads to Toshi, who also looked thrown off by the statement. What? No, I haven't. We got a badger to respond to you, and your quirk didn't work. That's animal experimentation. Izuku reminded him of his time before UA. Toshi rubbed his forehead and responded. That's not the same. Of course it is. You were worried the cells I put in the dog's body would kill the dog, but it didn't. What if your quirk killed the badger? But it didn't. He said logically. He turned to Kuda. How did you know your quirk wouldn't hurt the animal you spoke to? Some in the kitchen understood his logic and considered it. Toshi stopped at that and bit his lip in consideration. He opened his mouth a few times in an attempt to say something, but nothing came out. He finally let out a sigh and looked at the dog who was seated and watching the whole ordeal going on. As Izuku said, the dog was as healthy as it could be. Ida broke the silence first. Izuku, how much do you know about human biology? I know everything about base human biology and some quirked human biology, Izuku said with confidence. Quirked human biology? What do you mean? Mina asked. Yaoyorozu answered. The base human Izuku is referring to would be a quirkless human. It mostly applies to everyone to a greater extent. My heart would be where yours is, and so on. Quirked human biology would be the unique biology of anyone with a quirk. For example, Sato. I'm sure you have something to negate the effects of consuming sugar. She motioned to Sato, who was seated next to the dog. Sato nodded. I don't exactly remember the specifics, but I remember my liver and pancreas are way better than a normal person's. Also, my BLD cells are bigger or something, I can't recall. He said, scratching his chin. Yaoyorozu nodded. That also goes for mental quirk users like Shinso. I'm sure if we scanned his brain while he used his quirk, it would be very different from everyone else's. Izuku nodded at her perfect explanation. Yep. He smiled at Yaoyorozu. He turned to Ida. Why do you ask? Ida hesitated, but pushed forward. Do you think you can do what you did to the dog to a human? He looked right at Izuku's eyes when he asked. Toshi stood up at that. Now hold up. I was trying to get Izuku to understand animal experimentation is a no-no, but you want to jump into human experimentation? My brother is paralyzed from the waist down, and there is no one that can fix that, but Izuku just might. Ida snapped, and then paused. He took in a breath and calmed down. Yes, it could be dangerous, and I'm not saying he should go around doing what he did to the dog, but he could help. I know it's selfish, but it would be just as dangerous as an experimental surgery at the hospital. Izuku spoke right after Ida finished. I think it's okay to be selfish. No one is truly selfless. After that conversation ended, Ida couldn't wait and began to make calls to his family. It wasn't long before others caught wind of what had happened, and the staff was made know of the situation. Nizu had asked Izuku for a talk with Nim, already waiting in his office. She smiled softly at him and eyed the dog, who trotted a step behind him and quietly sniffed around before following Izuku to the couches where Nizu was seated across from Izuku's mother. Nizu watched the dog with interest and then turned his attention to Izuku. Would you please explain what happened? Izuku did so without hesitation. I caught the scent of BLD over the wall and found him almost dead. I got close and connected with me. He has some sort of emotional telepathy and pleaded for help. I offered him my help, but made sure he understood that it might not work. He wanted it anyway. I was healing him when you called. Now he better, he said proudly and leaned into Nim's hand as she brushed his messy hair back. Nizu listened without moving and then asked, what injuries did he have? Izuku looked at the mutt and motioned him to stand next to him. The dog did so obediently and stood with his side facing Nizu. He began to point at the dog's body. Most of the lumbar was shattered, and some of the lower ribs punctured his organs. The pelvis was mostly okay, legs were broken in a few spots, and he had internal bleeding from the ribs tearing his spleen and small intestinal tract. The dog sniffed his hand, pointing, and liked it. Nizu nodded along and thought for a moment. He was dead if it wasn't for you. His eyes locked into Izuku's. How did you heal him? The Chimera already had an idea how, but asked anyway. I paralyzed him with a parasite connected to me, and then made an external heart and lungs connected to him. I made him go to sleep with some serotonin in the BLD I produced. After that, I mixed my cells with his and had them heal the damage and make him better. My biggest worry was how my cells would react in a foreign body. He looked to Nim. That's why I never asked to donate BLD or organs infinitely, since I didn't know if my cells would react badly with unknown cells. Then he turned back to Nizu. With the last command I gave them, it seemed to work well. I'm guessing you told the cells to work with the body to survive? Nim said while gently scratching his head. Basically. He nodded. Nizu sighed and rubbed his snout before speaking. Izuku, I'm guessing you aren't aware of my past? When he shook his head, Nizu continued. The short of it is I was captured by a group of scientists and was experimented on for a long time before I managed to escape. And coming to learn you did something similar touched a nerve for me. Just as Nim was going to snap at Nizu, he raised a paw to stop her and continued. I am well aware Izuku is nothing like the scientists and only had good intentions. I just want to make sure Izuku knows not to go too far. It can become a slippery slope, especially with a quirk such as yours. Nizu's mind raced through images of hordes of perfect and adapting biological creatures causing havoc in the streets of Japan. Oh, like those movies we watched. Izuku exclaimed and turned to Nim in understanding. I won't do anything like that. He waved the idea away like it was improbable for him to ever do such a thing. Nizu stared at him for a short moment before moving on. Yes, the other thing I wished to talk about was what the Ida family asked of me. He paused and took his cup of cooling tea for a sip. I can neither condone nor condemn such an action. Doing such a thing as going to a private domicile to perform an advanced medical treatment without any form of training or licensing would be criminal. Izuku stared blankly at the chimera as he tried to process the words spoken to him. What? He tilted his head slightly. While I can't stop you from leaving the school grounds to visit a friend's family on your off time, I can remind you what you do in your free time is not my responsibility. Nizu continued. Izuku grunted in confusion and looked to Nim for help. She only smiled slightly and flicked her eyes towards Nizu. He turned his attention back to him. With that, I hope you have a good day. Nizu smiled and motioned to the door. Izuku looked thoroughly confused at the moment as Nim gently nudged him toward the door. The dog got up from his seated position and trotted behind the two. When outside, Izuku tried to ask his mother what he was talking about, but Nim gently put a finger to his mouth. The feral boy went along with her. The three arrived at Nim's home, and she shuffled the two inside. The mutt began to sniff the home, and Izuku looked at Nim for permission to talk. When she nodded, he began. Why was Nizu talking like that? Why didn't you let me talk? And can I help Ida's brother walk again? Izuku rapid-fired the questions. Nim placed a hand on Izuku's arm and guided him to a sofa. He diverted his path and sat on the ground to not break her stuff. She began. Izu, what you want to do to Ida's brother is illegal. Doing stuff like you did on, what's his name? She deviated from her explanation and looked at the calm dog looking at them. Izuku looked at the mutt and asked, What's your name? The mutt stared at him and made a connection. He felt confusion and uncertainty from the dog. He didn't have a name, so Izuku offered one. Kane, short for canine. Kane hopped to his paws and began to wag his tail in joy, and then he howled quietly in acceptance of his new name. Kane nosed at his hand and sat next to Izuku, wagging his tail. Nim smiled at the interaction between her son and the dog. Kane, that's a good name. She scratched Kane's neck and then focused back on the previous topic. As I was saying, you need a medical license and a license to use your quirk for medical purposes to do what you did on Kane. You have neither. That's why Nizu couldn't tell you it was okay for you to go perform surgery on Ida's brother. But what you do in your free time and what you tell us happened is all in your hands. She said the last part with heavy implications while maintaining eye contact. Izuku was beginning to understand bit by bit. So, I could get in trouble if I helped Ida's brother, and telling you will get me in trouble. He said slowly. Yes, but it's the weekend. You can go out with your friends and do what teenagers do in their free time. Nim said, smiling and leaning back on the couch. Izuku nodded and stood up. Well, I'm going to play with my friends. He said way too loudly, as if someone was listening in on their conversation. Nim snorted and choked back a laugh. She stood with him and pulled him into a hug, which he returned. Equally loudly, she responded. Of course, honey. Go have fun, love you. Kane stared at the two in confusion at their loud voices before following his pack leader out the door. Izuku quickly made his way to the dorms, where he found Ida quickly. The taller boy was chewing on his nails and jogging his knee in place. He stood up when Izuku came through the back door. Hello, Ida. Do you want to go and play? Izuku said, still too loudly. Everyone turned to him at such an odd request and loud voice. Ida also looked thrown off, and just as he was going to respond, Izuku kept talking. We should go and play at your house. He tried to make the same eye contact Nim did with him, but it made him look very menacing. Ida reeled back at the actions and looked around in confusion. Then, it all clicked into place. Yes, I would love to invite you to my home where I grew up and my family resides. He said, now equally as loud and stiff. Great, let's go. Izuku said, beaming and waving at everyone who was staring at the two in confusion. I'm going to play at Ida's house. By now? He said to the present pack members. The three of them walked out of the dorms, and the doors closed behind them. Kaken was the first to explode, of course. What the F was that? He looked around for answers. The maid of the boy who just left looked like she was putting together a puzzle. Toshi, meanwhile, was rubbing his forehead. He turned to Yairozu. You're the smartest. What was all that? He waved at the doors. Yaoyorozu blushed slightly at the compliment and shook her head. I'm not entirely sure. It was as if they were trying to convince us that they weren't going to Ida's household for Izuku to help Ida's brother. Mina jerked up and snapped her fingers, causing Toshi to startle. That's it. They can't tell anyone, or else we would have to report them as upstanding hero students that they were committing a medical crime or whatever. Everyone paused and looked at each other. Then Toshi sighed. We need to stop showing Izuku bad movies. He's way too impressionable. Izuku followed a tense Ida to a large house. Kane trotted behind his pack leader and looked around at the suburban neighborhood. Most of the homes were about the same size, but they varied by design. The one they were walking towards was tall with 4 stories and lots of gray and blues in the paint. Izuku politely wiped his paws on the front mat and had Kane copy him. Ida gave them a wry grin as they followed him inside. Mother, father? I am home, with guests. Ida announced into the home. A woman in her mid-50s turned a bend in the hallway. She was tall like her son with graying blue hair and glasses adorned her face. Izuku could see the resemblances between the two in their facial features, even though they were softened on her face. She smiled warmly at her son and hugged him tightly in greeting before turning to Izuku. Tenya has told me much about you. I am Nori Ida, and the man coming behind me is Takashi Ida, my husband, she said softly, just as a tall, broad man rounded the same corner. The man had all the features his packmate had: the strong jaw, dark hair, and intelligent eyes. Izuku Kiyama, the boy who took down the man who almost killed by oldest. He stared down at Izuku before bowing at the waist. I thank you for doing such a thing, and also taking care of Tenya while not at home. Nori followed suit and bowed, but not as deeply towards Izuku. Izuku looked between the two and beamed. Of course. He's one of my pack. I'll always take care of him, he said proudly. Behind Izuku, Tenya blushed slightly. The two adults straightened and invited them further into their home. They raised an eye at seeing Kane, but didn't stop him from quietly following along. They all went to a living room where Ida's older brother sat on a couch with another older man in his middle years. Bald with thick glasses and a button-up white shirt, he sat across from Tensei Ida. Tenya quickly greeted the old man, who turned out to be the family doctor, and then warmly greeted his brother. Izuku stood to the side to let his packmate greet his family properly. As they talked a bit, the old man approached him. Greetings, I am Sazuma Fumio, the physician of the Ida family. I was made aware that you could help Tensei with your quirk. Hello, I'm Izuku, Ida's pack leader. He paused and hummed as he looked at the family, who slightly turned at hearing their name. Tenya? No, Ten. He nodded in acceptance and went on. I'm pretty sure I can. I helped Kane. He motioned to the dog, quietly seated at his side. The old man furrowed his brow at the rapid change of subject from one thing to another. Then he turned his attention to the dog. Helped him how? The old man leaned down to observe the dog before letting Kane sniff his hand. May I use my quirk on him? It will not harm him. Only a diagnosis. Think of it as a precise CT scan without the magnets. Izuku didn't see the harm in it and nodded. Wait. He told Kane, and he stayed still. Sazuma's hands glowed white, and they swept through Kane's body between his hands. Each hand was between Kane's head, and the light passed into his head and out in rapid succession. The old man hummed in interest as he began to look at Kane with fascination. Kane has a quirk, does he not? Yep. Emotional telepathy or something, Izuku answered easily. The old man stopped and looked up at Izuku. What? Then he must have a mutation that enhances his body. The density in the bone structure is abnormal, and that's not to mention the compressed muscles. MHM? Oh, that. I did that. Sazuma turned to Izuku at hearing that. How? What is your quirk? Cellular manipulation. I can change my body to whatever I want. Izuku showed an example by shifting his fingers to claws and tendrils extended from his wrist. Scales extended from his arm, and the second pair of eyes opened on his face. Kane forgotten, Sazuma got up and took a hold of Izuku's clawed hand and used his quirk on him without asking. My God, your bones are covered in metal. The tendons are as strong as steel bands, and your muscular structure is as dense as cables. He whispered in awe as he slowly rotated his hand and moved slowly up his arm. A cough interrupted Izuku from saying something. He turned to see the Ida family watching them. Nori coughed louder to get Sazuma's attention, who was enraptured by the boy's arm. It worked, and he jolted away from Izuku's arm. Nori motioned to the couches. Sazuma sheepishly nodded and sat with Izuku following and then sitting on the ground. Everyone's eyes went to him at his actions. I'm really heavy and don't want to break your stuff, Izuku said by explanation. Kane trotted beside him and laid down next to his leg. Tenya began by introducing Izuku to his brother. Tensei, this is Izuku, class president or pack leader of my class. The two waved happily to each other, and Tenya continued. Yes, well, Izuku's quirk is very fascinating, I'll say. Sazuma interrupted. What is this about? Tensei said before his mother rebuked the family physician. Tenya cleared his throat and continued. Izuku, can you please explain? Izuku beamed and nodded. Sure, Tenya bashfully smiled at the name. The feral boy explained his quirk and how he developed it to become perfect for his needs in all things. He explained how he studied heavily into human, animal, and quirk biology to help him becoming a hero. Then he explained how he found Kane, how he was on death's door, how he healed him, and how Ten asked if he could do the same to a human. And then, I tricked my pack into believing we were here playing when I came here to heal you. He finished brightly. Everyone was quiet as they processed the story of the energetic young man. It took a full 2 minutes before anyone said anything. You think you can heal my back? Tensei asked neutrally. Izuku nodded. Definitely. I did it on a dog. It's not so different. He said, beaming. Well, that's enough for me. When can we do this? Tensei clapped his hands nervously and looked around. Hold on a moment. Tensei, I understand your hurry, but I have to ask if you have any more experience working with such a delicate part of the body such as the spine? Takashi asked Izuku. Izuku thought about it and said, well, I did make mine very flexible. He showed it off by turning over 180 degrees. Also, I did heal it once when we were at the training camp. I broke it when I was fighting against Muscle Man. I didn't even think about it until now. Everyone in the Ida family looked at each other and one by one nodded and then turned to Sazuma. I'll help in whatever way I can. With his help, everyone turned to Izuku in acceptance of his help. Great. All I need is a quarter cow or any animal is fine both for energy and mass. He turned to Tensei. Also, do you want any improvement? Like denser bones, stronger ligaments, or claws? He offered casually. When Tensei gave him a wry grin like his brother and shook his head, Izuku shrugged. Your loss. As they prepped a room for the surgery, Izuku just realized he may have created an immortal dog. Looking down at Kane and recalling what command he gave his cells in the dog, keep the dog alive and healthy. Theoretically, Kane could keep living so long as nothing killed him outright, and even then Izuku wasn't sure. Kane looked up at him and wagged his tail at the attention. Izuku shrugged and patted his head. He would just need to alter the command he would tell the cells in the oldest Ida child. The room they were using was a guest room in the Ida household. Currently, Sazuma, the family doctor, was sterilizing the room for them to use. Even though Izuku did the same operation on Kane on the wood floors, and he was as healthy as he could be, Sazuma wanted to be careful. Plastic sheets were spread out, and the bed was covered in a hospital's bed sheets. Tenya came up to him, watching Sazuma work. Izuku, the meat you requested is here. He motioned to the kitchen. Izuku nodded. He already knew that from the scent, but followed along anyway. Kane followed quietly behind. You sure have a big house, he said absent-mindedly as they walked. Tenya chuckled. Yes, it was quite spacious and more so when I was younger. He particularly looked at a wall with discolored paint reminded him of running through it when he was a child. Many fond memories, he said wistfully. They arrived in the kitchen where Tenya's father was setting a large plastic-wrapped package on the kitchen counter. Izuku could smell the fresh BLD coming from it. He glanced up at the two boys and motioned to the quarter cow. How do you want this prepared? It will take some time, Takashi said, unwrapping the plastic. Izuku looked at the man in confusion. Prepare for what? The father paused and looked at him. To cook? He made a face of realization. Oh, it's fine, I'll just eat it now. Izuku waved the idea off. Izuku can eat raw meat due to his immune system, Tenya said by explanation. As far as he knows, he cannot get ill. Takashi looked at Izuku and shrugged. If you're sure, go for it. Izuku nodded with a smile and went up to the slab of meat and bones. Just as he was about to begin, he felt a connection with Kane. He looked at the dog and felt the emotion, hungry. He nodded with tendrils extending and shifting hands to claws. He sliced through a sizable steak with bone and all. He tossed it to Kane and snapped it out of the air with a wagging tail. He trotted off with his meal with an emotion scent of gratitude. After that, Izuku began to dig in. Tendrils extended and began to consume the mass, with breaking bones and tearing flesh. The quarter cow was devoured in a few minutes. The Ida men watched on in disturbed fascination. Takashi had seen many things a retired hero, but seeing a young man devour something almost his size was new. To him, meat, bone, and sinew were all consumed. Tendrils retracted as the meal was just about finished. All that was left was a rib that Izuku was munching on as he savored the meat. I don't think I had beef before. At least not raw. After a moment of thinking, he continued. It's okay, bear is better though. Takashi pushed up his glasses. Well, I can't say I've ever had bear before. He cleared his throat and asked, Are you ready? Do you need anything else? The nervousness was coming off of him in waves, and Izuku could smell it on both of the Ida men. The feral boy thought about it and shrugged. I'm pretty sure I can do it now. I didn't really need anything. The cow was just for some extra energy. But I helped Kane without preparing, and look at him. He pointed at the dog who was lying down, his tail wagging and gnawing on the remaining bone from his steak. Chunks of bone were stripped off with each pass of his teeth. The Ida men looked at the biologically enhanced dog and then back to Izuku. They relaxed a bit and chatted in the kitchen about other topics. Takashi talked about his work as a retired hero and shared stories about Tenya as a child, much to his embarrassment. Nori and Tensei soon joined the three in small talk and stories, their attempts to forget the illegal and dangerous operation that would happen within the day. Sazuma tightened the strings on Izuku's robe and made sure everything was in its proper place. I could have just taken my shirt off. Bacteria and other things don't cling to me very often, Izuku said, and let the physician continue to make sure things were as proper as they could be. Precautions. It's better to be overly careful than not enough, Sazuma said. Once done, he stood up and looked Izuku up and down. Good, very good. Let us begin. They moved into the plastic-wrapped room, and to Tensei, who was facing down on a bed. His lower back was exposed with the rest of his body covered. Sazuma had already given him a slow-acting sedative. Tensei was hooked up to a small heart monitor and an oxygen mask on his mouth. Izuku was already prepped on where they would be operating and the injury location. The spine was made up of many vertebrae, each on top of the other, making a chain of sorts. The vertebrae were grouped up to make things easier. Izuku didn't know the history of it and didn't care too much. The CRVCL has 7 vertebrae focused on the neck, C1, C7. The thoracic has 12 vertebrae, and they make up the length of the rib cage, T1, T12. Finally, the lumbar only has 5 vertebrae, L1, L5, and that was where Tensei was hurt. L2 and L3. Sazuma reminds Izuku as they approach. I know, Saz, he said with a sigh and moved to the location. Sazuma smirked under his mask at the name and applied the local anesthetic to Tensei's lumbar. Setting the syringe aside, he motioned Izuku to begin. The green-haired boy didn't hesitate and had tendrils extending from his shoulders as he felt at the vertebrae. He found the right one, went up one more to L5, and began his second operation. He first created a parasite that would block out the spinal nervous system. What is that? Sazuma asked as he watched the parasite get gently placed where Izuku cut. A parasite I created to paralyze opponents. The only difference is that it's still attached to me to make it easier to pull out once I'm done, Izuku said as he cut open the previously scarred area. Tendrils began to snake into the incision, all just as thin as needles. How do you plan to see? The physician was placing his hands in opposite locations to use his quirk to see what was going on. I don't. I use my tendrils to feel everything out. And if I need to, I can grow an eye. They stopped talking as they focused on Tensei. Izuku continued to gently tap around where the injured vertebrae were in the spinal column. He began to see what the previous doctors had done to heal him. It made sense that they couldn't heal him properly otherwise. Izuku wouldn't be there. The spinal cord was severed by Stain's sword and torn badly when it was yanked out. Unless the doctors had a form of regenerated quirk, there would be no way to heal him. Luckily, Izuku was there. He began by cutting off the ends of each spinal cord and extracted the material for disposal. Then he slowly began to make the connection to the severed end. One by one, tendrils created nerves, melded them to one open end, and connected to the opposite end. It took some time to find the proper connections, He didn't want to connect the wrong nerve to the wrong end. As he worked, Sazuma watched in fascination at Izuku's perfect work. No more than an hour passed, and Izuku was done with the spinal cord. With the harder part over, he moved to the surrounding vertebrae. The sword that split his spinal cord also tore through the intervertebral disc, which, for Izuku, was preferable since melding vertebrae back together instead of just healing what was in between would have been harder. The previous doctors already placed an artificial disc there and melded some of the vertebrae where it was fractured. So Izuku tore the disc there and carefully extracted it from Tensei's body. Then he got to work on creating a replacement intervertebral disc. It wasn't too difficult as a tendril went to the middle of where the disc should be and grew to the right size, making the cells copy from another disc to be safe. Between each vertebra, they are connected by facet joints made of bone and ligaments. The previous doctors did a well enough job melding it back to how it should be, but Izuku didn't like their standards. He snaked into the joint and began to heal the bone structure between the fragments. He made sure they had the same quality of bone around them, just like Tensei wanted. Finally, the ligament was left and the easiest to construct. He again removed the artificial one placed there by the licensed doctors and quickly created the ligaments between L2 and L3. On his way out of the incision, he closed any cuts he created and healed the opening where dozens of tendrils pulled out. Not even a scar was left as the wound was closed. Izuku let Saz examine the healed area to make sure nothing was left amiss. He stayed connected to the parasite just in case and let Saz give Izuku his input. Saz continued to move around the healed area and stared at where the wound was. It's perfect, just like any other patient, like it was never torn apart. The old man whispered. He let go of Tensei and rubbed his clean gloves on the area. Not even a scar. Yep, Izuku said proudly behind his mask. Can I pull this out now? He tugged on the tendril connected to Tensei's spine. Sazuma nodded and watched as the parasite was extracted and the wound healed. Izuku stood back and looked around at Tensei's prone form. The boy nodded and sat on the ground for a short rest. While he could keep on going for days, it took a lot of mental focus to heal a delicate part of the body, such as the spinal cord. If he ever had to work on a brain, he would be drained for the day. Saz looked at Izuku, and he looked up at him. What? He asked with his head tilted. You could be the best surgeon in the world. Sazuma said. Is there any way I could convince you to change careers? He said hopefully. Thanks, Saz. But no, I want to be a hero. Maybe if I get bored of being a hero, I can SWCH, but I want to hunt bad guys. He said with a beaming smile at the man. He smiled back and nodded. I expected as much, but it was worth a shot. Well, come on. Let's give the Idas the good news. He said, motioning to the door. Izuku hopped to his paws and joined Saz as he opened the door to the three Idas sitting in the hallway together. They jumped to their feet and looked expectantly at them. Saz removed his mask and smiled reassuringly at them. Saz placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder and said, It went perfectly. I fully believe Tensei will be able to return to hero work as soon as he recovers. And that shouldn't take long either. The Idas let out sighs of relief, and a little sob escaped from Nori at hearing her son would be back to how he was. Takashi hugged his wife and held her close at the news. Tenya smiled gratefully at Izuku and bowed deeply to his friend. The three Idas gave their thanks to Izuku and Saz for helping Tensei. Saz shoved all the praise onto Izuku since he just watched. Izuku began to get embarrassed at the praise as it mounted and just smiled in acceptance. Izuku stayed over at Tenya's home for the night, both to make sure nothing went wrong with Tensei and also because it was late. While Izuku didn't see anything wrong with that, the Idas didn't let him leave. After dinner and shower, Izuku laid down on Tenya's bedroom floor in pajamas much too big for him. Kane was asleep by his side and Tenya was softly snoring. Izuku smiled at being able to help one of his pack and fell asleep soundly. Izuku woke up to a panicked scream in the house. Both Izuku and Tenya raced out of the room to find Tensei holding himself up by the kitchen counter with wobbly legs and his mother helping him stand with worry written across her face. Izuku calmed down quickly and Tenya raced forward with his quirk to help his mother with his brother. I thought something bad happened, Izuku said with a chuckle. How can he walk? It's been less than 12 hours. Nori asked Izuku as she tried to set Tensei on a chair, but he refused to sit. The feral boy shrugged. I healed him. He said as if that would explain everything. Kane was hunting with me the next morning, and I did more to him than to Tensei. Kane next to Izuku wagged his tail and stuck his chest out with pride. Takashi walked into the room with his phone and rushed to help Tensei, who was trying to walk again, much to the consternation of his family. Sazuma will be here shortly. Tensei Ida, if you don't sit down this moment, I can walk. I'm gonna walk. Tensei argued and finally gave up and let his family sit him down with a sigh. He looked up at Izuku and smiled brightly at him. From the bottom of my heart, thank you. If you ever need anything, I will do everything in my power to help. Granted, as long as it isn't too illegal. He finished with a laugh and a slap on the arm from Nori and a disappointed look from his father. Izuku beamed and pulled up his pajama bottoms from slipping. He made a small claw on his hip and had it hold it from falling for the third time this morning. Happy to help one of my pack. Half an hour later, Sazuma bustled through the front door and hurried over to Tensei. He asked him questions while he activated his quirk around the previously injured area. Tensei was more than happy to show his limited capabilities, as temporary as they were, to the physician. Sazuma watched as he stood up on unsteady legs, but he stood on them anyway, walking a few steps before stopping and being helped to sit down. Marvelous. And the young man didn't just wave his hand and poof, it was fixed. He did it manually. One severed nerve at a time. Saz said, sitting across from Tensei. They looked to Izuku, who was struggling to use chopsticks to pick up rice from a bowl. With a face of concentration, he picked up the rice and successfully snatched it before eating it. He looked up as he was chewing and spoke with his mouth full. What? Tensei chuckled and shook his head. Nothing at all. Just talking about how well you healed me. Izuku swallowed the rice and spoke. You could have been running by now if you let me build up the muscles in your legs and back that atrophied. Tensei looked very interested, but Nori cut him off before he could speak. But there's no need for such. We'll take it one step at a time, right, Tensei? She asked with a pointed look at her oldest son. Said oldest son sighed. Yes, mother. Sazuma stayed for breakfast with the five of them. They talked about mundane things such as the weather or how there was new construction down the road, and what would the structure be. It was a peaceful time as Izuku mostly listened to the Ida's talk. Take care of yourself. Nori kissed the top of Tenya's head as he and Izuku were headed back to the dorms. Yes, call if you need anything. The both of you. Takashi said, looking at Izuku and his youngest. Sazuma had already left earlier that day, claiming he had more work to do at the clinic. Now, it was just the Idas giving their farewells to the young men as they left. Tensei was back inside his old room resting from extraneous exercise, such as trying to walk to the kitchen on his own. He already gave more thanks to Izuku before they left, and gave his number to the feral boy if he ever needed anything. Just as the two young men were turning, Nori grabbed Izuku's hand and placed something in it. It doesn't come close to what you did for us, but I believe good things should be rewarded, she said, smiling while patting his arm. Izuku looked at the large clip of money and then up at the two. Not ever being in such a situation, he accepted it with a grateful smile. Thanks. With that, the two young men and the dog left. Izuku slid a large amount of money into his abdomen for safekeeping and walked happily next to his packmate, who was also just as happy. So, this was the end of part 9 of this series. Stay tuned for next part of this series, and if you like this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Until next time.